Black Terror, City of Bones. New York wore its midnight like a bruise. The rain fell in thin needles that stitched the neon to the wet pavement, and the city's bones creaked where the L trains curved through the fog. The cop on the corner said it was the weather making tempers short and hearts mean. The barkeep said it was the money. The priest said it was the war. Bob Benton knew better. He'd seen the rot under the skin. He locked the door of Benton's pharmacy at 10:07 p.m., wiped a thumb across the front glass to smear away a child's handprint, and stood listening to the street breathe. He'd been back from Europe for 2 years and still woke at odd hours to count heartbeats that weren't there anymore. The red neon prescription bottle hummed. Across the avenue, a flophouse saxophone climbed a broken ladder of notes and fell off halfway up. Go home, he told himself. Instead, he turned the deadbolt, crossed the dark store, and lifted the trap door behind the counter. He descended into the basement where the air tasted like chalk and old paper. Down there, past shelves of mildewed ledgers and a crate of wartime sulfa, sat a steel locker with a broken padlock that no ordinary thief would ever open. Inside, a glass ampoule caught the basement bulb and winked. Formic ethers. The mistake he could never stop making. Bob's hand hovered over the ampoule and then closed around it. The city was getting stranger. Young men with hollow eyes hanging off street lamps like decorations, mobsters buying up funeral parlors, and rumors that parts of Brooklyn smelled like formaldehyde at 3 a.m. He'd promised himself after the war that he was done with the mask, the cape, the skull and crossbones brand that made monsters hesitate. But the rot under the skin had a new pulse. He swallowed the serum. The world tilted as if New York itself had drawn in a breath. Muscles sang. Nerve endings uncoiled like springs. The tired ache in his chest, the one made of names and dirt and ringing artillery, faded under a clean, electric certainty. When he climbed the stairs, the man in the mirror behind the soda fountain was no longer the quiet pharmacist. He was the thing the city whispered about in alleyways and precinct houses, the shadow that bit the hand that fed on the poor. The Black Terror stepped out into the rain. The first body turned up in the East River, snagged on a pier like cotton on a nail. The badge who pulled it in smoked a cigarette with hands that shook and said the kid looked like he'd only just learned to shave. No wallet, no identifying marks except a small tattoo on the wrist, a number. The morgue men swore they'd seen the face before, at least once a week for months now. The same jawline, the same eyes. Copycats, the detective muttered, or cousins. The second body wasn't a body. It got up off the slab. That was in a basement lab off Hester Street, where Black Terror broke through a bolted door at 1:42 a.m. The room beyond smelled like pennies and mildew and something sweet that didn't belong near the living. Steel tables, rubber tubing, a chalkboard covered in numbers that pretended to make sense if you squinted, and on the table a boy who opened his eyes without any air in his lungs. They were blue eyes, winter blue, and as empty as the ocean. The Black Terror moved before the thing could move, one hand on its chest, the other on its throat. Easy, he said out of habit. His voice a bass line, the room answered. The boy's nails raked his forearm. He was strong, too strong for a corpse, but not strong enough for the terror. What did they do to you? The words were useless. The boy didn't know a language anymore. The footsteps in the hallway came quick and scared. 2 men, coats too nice for the neighborhood, hats pulled low. They were whispering in the tone of people who had been paid to make bad things invisible. Get it on the truck. Doctor says no more delays. The Black Terror put the body back onto the slab like he was tucking a child into bed and stepped into the hallway. The men ran as soon as they saw the skull. One made it 5 steps. The other didn't. The Terror's fist met a jaw, and the jaw remembered the floor. The runner slammed through a door and into the wet night where a panel truck idled, its cargo doors yawning. The Terror reached the truck in 6 heartbeats, tore the hinge out of the steel, and stared into the dark. Coffins. 6 of them, each with a small round window where a face might look back. Only one window wasn't black glass. Behind it, eyes opened, winter blue. The driver, who had been hiding his courage under the dashboard, came up with a revolver and emptied it into the Black Terror's back. The bullets complained and flattened, and the driver stared, incredulous, as the man with the skull turned and calmly took the gun away from him like a toy from a child. "Tell me," the Terror said, "where this truck is going." The driver told him. He would have told him anything. The address was a mortuary called St. Raymond's, named for the patron saint of midwives and the falsely accused. The irony sat like a piano on Bob's shoulders as he slipped through the back alley where the rain sluiced off the gutters and into a yard of granite teeth. The mortuary's parlor windows glowed low and warm, the kind of yellow light that made families believe in gentle goodbyes. Black Terror found the real work downstairs. The door to the basement had a new lock and an old cross hanging on a bent nail. The steps creaked as if they remembered each foot that had gone down them. In the room at the bottom, a half-dozen men in rolled shirt sleeves moved between tables with the brisk grace of butchers. Big hands working small instruments, steel trays gliding, the smell of carbolic soap and copper. At the far end of the room stood a woman in a black dress and a lab coat, her dark hair pulled back into a no-nonsense knot. Her eyes were so pale they almost weren't eyes at all, and when she looked up from her notes and saw the skull on his chest, she didn't flinch. She smiled like a teacher who had been expecting a stubborn boy to show up late. "Ah," she said, "America's favorite bad dream." "Doctor," he said, because everything in her posture said doctor. "Your name?" "A fine question," she said, accent clipped and careful, vowels scoured clean by a decade of pretending to be from somewhere else. "Names are fragile, Mr. Terror. Mine has survived a war. You may call me Dr. Colt." "Cold," he said. "Yes," she said. "How tidy your language is." He took in the tables. The men weren't butchers. They were skilled. They were making incisions at exact lengths and angles. They were measuring. And the bodies on the tables, their faces were all the same kind of young, the same winter blue eyes, each with a tiny tattooed number on the wrist. "What are you building?" the Black Terror asked. "Not building," Dr. Colt said. "Restoring, correcting." She stepped closer the way someone might approach a stray dog with a hand out. "You and I are cousins, Mr. Terror." "A chemistry of courage. But yours is a moral accident. Mine is engineering." He moved and she moved with him, circling. The men around them froze inside their busy tasks, like dancers waiting for the music to tell them what to do next. "War taught us both," she went on. "The Reich's foolishness was metaphysical. They wanted angels and demons. I wanted soldiers who didn't get homesick. The formula we perfected in the ruins does not make the dead live again. Do not fear superstition. It only teaches muscles to remember what to do." "Dead boys," the Black Terror said. "Marching." "Dead boys," she agreed, no apology in it. "Marching into a city where men like Lombardo have made a harvest of grief." She nodded at one of the men. He turned up a radio. From somewhere above them, maybe the parlor where the flowers were, music drifted down, a slow trumpet bleeding into strings. "Mr. Lombardo will be here soon to inspect his investment," Dr. Colt said like a hostess. "I find gangsters tasteless, but necessary. They understand logistics." "And this?" He tapped a tray of vials with a gloved knuckle. The vials trembled and chimed. The labels were written in a hand more precise than any engineer's. "That," Dr. Colt said, "is your legacy." The Black Terror picked up a vial and tilted it to catch the light, clear as rainwater. He held it to his nose, a ghost of camphor, a hint of something like antiseptic and something like cloves, not his serum, but not far from it. "You worked on the outskirts of Warsaw," he said quietly. Memory slid into place with the same reluctant click as a bullet chambering. "Underground. experimenting with cold water shock and metabolic stasis. Your files were supposed to burn." "Files burn," Dr. Colt said. "Ideas don't. You know this, Mr. Terror. You drank an idea tonight." Her gaze skated down his shoulders and arms. She saw strength and cataloged it, a scientist admiring a specimen, admiring herself. "You can stop this," the Black Terror said. "Pour your vials out. Close your eyes. Walk upstairs and tell the families you are sorry." "And then what?" she asked, amusement crackling like cellophane. "Prison? Your jails do not know what to do with me." He didn't say the word killing. He didn't threaten. He stood in the center of a room full of the unthinkable and clenched his hands until the leather of his gloves creaked. "Who are they?" he asked instead, pointing to the numbered boys. "Where did you get them?" "Soldiers," she said. "From both sides. Many from both sides. America ships its fallen home with great ceremony. We borrow them for a night and return them on time." Pain went through Bob like a nail. "You're lying," he said. "I am efficient," she corrected. "Your mobsters own docks, trucks, night watchmen, and grief. They divert the coffins that match our criteria. The bodies are not harmed. We are not ghouls. We only remind them." "Remind them to do what?" "To be used," she said, and for the first time there was an ember of feeling in her voice. "To not rot in dirt while men who made money out of their courage continue to make more." He took one step forward. She didn't retreat. He could reach her throat from here. He could crush the word efficient out of her forever. The elevator at the far end of the basement sighed. The gate rattled open. 3 men in suits stepped out, cologne fighting with formaldehyde. Behind them came a 4th who didn't bother with cologne. He wore his wealth like a weapon and his smile like a bandage over something that had already died. "Dr. K," he said, "you work late." "Mr. Lombardo," Dr. Colt said, "your city has a schedule." Lombardo saw the skull and stopped smiling. "You," he said. "Me," the Black Terror said. Guns arrived from holsters the way knives find arguments. The men aimed center mass and then, almost in the same breath, remembered the stories and lifted to the head. Dr. Colt lifted a hand. "Please," she said, "not near the product." Lombardo didn't lower his gun. He took measure of the distance to the elevator, the weight of the men around him, the math of a legend. The lights went out. No one had touched the switch. The darkness came like a collapsing roof, sudden and heavy. The men shouted and shouldered into one another. Someone fired. Someone else cursed the echo. The radio upstairs hiccuped and died. In the dark, something wet breathed. The glass windows in the coffin lids shone with newborn moons, the pale reflection of the emergency exit sign over the stair. One by one, the circles moved as faces turned toward the sound. "Don't open them," Dr. Colt said sharply, her voice precise in the black. "They are not ready." But someone had panicked and hit the lever on a coffin latch. The lid hissed. Cold air spilled. A hand came out, searching for a rifle that wasn't there. It found a jacket lapel and pulled. A heavy man yelped and slammed to the floor. The hand explored his chest the way a blind man reads a book. "Lights," Dr. Colt said, too calm. "Now." Electricity returned like a heartbeat restarting. It threw a yellow veil over the room. The scene wasn't complicated. Guns, coffins, a doctor, a gangster, a legend. But the atmosphere had changed. The dead boys were awake, not fully, but enough. The Black Terror moved. He didn't go for Lombardo or the doctor. He went for the lever on the wall that fed the gurney line from the elevator to the embalming stations. He ripped it down. The chain snapped. Steel shrieked. The assembly line that turned grief into logistics stuttered and died. "Get upstairs!" He barked at the men in shirt sleeves. "Out!" They scrambled, and not because they'd seen his fists pulping brick, because his voice reminded them of a sergeant they once knew who told them when to run. Lombardo fired at the Black Terror's face and missed by less than a confession. The Terror closed the distance, knocked the gun from Lombardo's hand, and put him into the wall so hard that the plaster shook loose a century of dust. Lombardo sagged, sliding down into his expensive shoes. "You don't understand," Lombardo slurred, blood painting his teeth. "You can't stop grief." "I'm not stopping it," the Black Terror said. "I'm ending your business model." Dr. Colt had not fled. She stood with one hand on a clipboard, the other at her side. She looked like a widow in a photograph, patient with the way men made messes of rooms. "You will not kill me," she said. It was not a guess. "No," he said. "Killing you is too easy. I'm going to turn off your idea." He smashed the vials. Glass leapt. Clear liquid sprayed like rain in reverse. The smell of camphor and cloves climbed into the air and then fell, spent. Dr. Colt didn't move. She didn't even blink as her years of ruin shattered at his feet. "The formula is in my head," she said. "You have broken jars, not memory." "I know," he said. He picked up Lombardo with one hand, the way you pick up a dog that forgot old lessons, and walked him toward the elevator. "We're going for a ride." "To where?" Lombardo managed. "Your docks," the Black Terror said. Brooklyn smelled the way it always smelled when it was almost morning. Coal, coffee, salt, and sin. The warehouse on Pier 37 had a railroad spur and a sign that still said, "McCready Shipping," though McCready had been dead since 1939. Inside the cavern, wooden crates were stacked in plum rows. Black letters stenciled each lid. "Property of U.S. Army. Do not open." The men in the warehouse didn't wear uniforms. They wore the same rolled shirt sleeves and hard hats as the boys in Dr. Colt's basement. "What are you doing?" one of them asked, when he saw the skull and the gangster and the blood. The question was small and honest, the kind you ask your priest when he shows up at the racetrack. "Closing time," the Black Terror said. He threw Lombardo to the floor in the center of the tracks and tore the seal off the nearest crate with a tire iron. Inside, a coffin, just like the ones at St. Raymond's. The small round window on this one was black glass. He smashed it with the tire iron. Winter blue eyes looked up at him. There are moments when a city stops being a place and becomes a cut you can't close. This was one. Benton could feel it. The seam splitting the borough from the island from the continent from the old world where wars built the future out of bones. He lifted the coffin lid. The boy inside wasn't a boy. His hair was regulation short. His face was the kind a mother frames. His wrist was tattooed with a number that didn't belong on an American skin. The Black Terror took that wrist, gently, and felt for a pulse he prayed not to find. There was none. He shut the lid and stood there with his hand spread on the wood like he could hold the whole ocean back. "Please," Lombardo said from the floor, for the first time speaking in a voice that didn't have an invoice attached. "You don't understand what she promised." "She promised you soldiers who don't unionize," the Black Terror said. "She promised me an army that couldn't testify," Lombardo said, and started to cry in little bitter hiccups. The Black Terror looked at the rows of crates. He had the strength to smash them all. He had the anger to burn the pier. But he also had the memory of Tim's laugh, the one you could hear through a dust mask during a warehouse bust when the boy would say something dumb on purpose just to see Bob's eyes crinkle. Tim. He turned toward a crate at the far end of the row. Something in his chest, a wire or a string, had been tugged there. He approached without knowing why he knew. He tore the lid. He didn't breathe until the light found the face. The face was younger than it should have been. The hair cut too neat. The jaw still looking for the man it would become. But he would have known him blindfolded, underwater, in a hurricane. "Tim," he said, and the word had too many edges. The small round window showed no movement. He smashed it anyway. He lifted the lid. Tim's eyes were closed. The number on his wrist was small and mean. His hands were folded on his chest, the way someone had taught a mortician's assistant long ago. "Don't," Lombardo said from somewhere behind him, as if the word could change the shape of the next second. Black Terror put his fingers to Tim's throat. Nothing. He put his ear to Tim's chest. Nothing the way an empty house is nothing, full of drafts and ghosts. He didn't realize he was talking until his voice ran out. "I'm sorry. I should have been there. I should have." But there wasn't a sin large enough to fill the blank that lay between what he wanted and what he got. He stood with his hands on Tim's shoulders and tried to lift him back into the world by will alone. The body didn't know how to come. Behind him, a soft step. Dr. Cult. She had followed. Of course she had followed. Ideas do. "You are sentimental," she said almost kindly. "So are we all." It is the flaw in the human engine. The Black Terror didn't turn. "Can you fix him?" She considered the question with more respect than he deserved. "Fix is a word for clocks," she said. "I can wind him. He will do what he was made to do." He turned then, and there was no mask in the world heavy enough to hide his face. His voice came out low and razor-edged. He was made to be a boy. He made himself a hero. "Heroes are useful," she said. "You, of all men, should understand." He stepped toward her, and she stepped toward him because neither of them knew how to retreat. They stood in the hum of the warehouse, lungs ticking, the river licking pilings, the sky lightening toward a day that would pretend to be ordinary. "You can't stop me with your hands," Dr. Cult said. "You can't stop me by breaking jars. My idea is in the cracks of this country. The war put it there." "Maybe," he said, "but ideas die of starvation." He reached into the coffin and lifted Tim. Gently, carefully, the way you lift a child who fell asleep on the couch and has to be carried to bed. He felt the weight, so much lighter than it used to be, so much heavier, and he took him to the rail spur. "What are you doing?" Dr. Cult asked. "Funeral," he said. There was a switch box on the wall by the dock door. He pulled it. Somewhere out on the pier, a whistle answered, then another. The men in the warehouse, Lombardo's men, McCrady's men, Grief's men, looked at one another and began to move, not because the Black Terror had ordered them, but because the thing in his hands made orders unnecessary. They formed two lines without knowing why, as if there were uniforms sewn into their ribs. One by one, the lidless coffins rolled down the spur toward the night, past the men, past Dr. Cult, past Lombardo curled on the floor, past the Black Terror standing like a statue of a sin you can't name. Out on the pier, they tipped, slid, and obeyed the river. The water took them with sounds like breaths being returned. Dr. Cult didn't speak. Her eyes were winter, but her hands shook. "You waste material," she said finally. "I bury boys," he said. When the last coffin slid off into the gray, the Black Terror turned and faced her. "Leave my city," he said. "Leave my dead." "And if I don't?" she asked, as if she were curious about a recipe. "Then you'll learn what ideas are afraid of." He expected her to scoff. She didn't. She tilted her head like a woman reading a sign in a foreign language and filed him away. "We'll see each other again," she said. "Not if I see you first," he said, and meant it. She walked out, her heels making small, hard sounds on the boards, each a punctuation mark in a paper no judge would read. Lombardo dragged himself after her, trying to decide whether to crawl or stand. The men who had watched the coffins go took off their hats and didn't look at one another for a long time. The Black Terror stood alone on the pier with the dawn wet on his face and the weight of a boy in his arms. He didn't toss Tim to the river. He set him down, lowered, a kneel that turned into a prayer without words. He touched the skull and crossbones emblem on his chest and felt like he was at confession with no priest, only the city, the cold wind, the gulls, and the knowledge that the idea he'd smashed tonight would try again tomorrow. He thought of the basement at St. Raymond's, the careful math, the vials, the numbered wrists. He thought of his own ampoule in the basement of the pharmacy, gleaming like a trap. He thought of Dr. Cult saying the war had seeded a new kind of logic in the bones of the century. Maybe she was right, but logic has nothing to say to love. He lifted Tim once more and carried him to the edge of the pier. Beneath them, the river moved, indifferent and eternal. The city behind him yawned awake, taxicabs coughing, bakery doors unlocking, a newsboy shouting about a different scandal. He held the boy a long time, longer than the morning had, and then, with a gentleness that felt like tearing cloth, he let him go. The water closed and opened and went on. The pharmacy bell jingled at 9:06 a.m. Mrs. Coughlin came in for her hypertension powders, and Mr. Benton measured them out with steady hands. He made change. He put extra peppermints in the jar for the kids. The radio behind the counter hissed a short bulletin about a warehouse fire on Pier 37. No casualties, just smoke and wet wood. The announcer chuckled about careless dock workers and moved on to a story about baseball. At 10:31, a man in a suit with a government pin bought a bottle of aspirin and stared too long at Bob's face, like he was trying to match it to a memory. At 12:04, rain started again, and at 12:07, a child pressed a handprint on the glass. Bob wiped it away, and it smeared, and he laughed quietly because it felt like proof that the world still had jokes. He kept the trap door locked. He told himself every hour that he would throw the ampule in the trash. But a city has bones, and they move, and some nights the stitching comes loose. That evening he walked to St. Raymond's. The parlor windows were dark. The cross on the basement door hung crooked, the bent nail empty. He opened the door and went down the stairs into a cold and abandoned room. The tables were clean. The chalkboard had been erased with obsessive care. On the far wall, where the vials had shattered, the floor still smelled like cloves. He stood in the quiet and heard the city above him, the car horns, the footsteps, the laughter that sounded like glass, the grief that sounded like thunder far away. He knew the idea hadn't died. He knew Dr. Cult's pale eyes were out there counting, balancing some new ledger. He turned to go, then stopped. On the metal table where the radio had sat, someone had left a small object, a single numbered tag, the kind you tie to a toe. It read, TIM. He picked it up and held it until the edges cut his palm. He put it in his coat pocket. He went upstairs and stepped out into the rain. Across the street, a newsstand stacked headlines like playing cards. He bought a paper and folded it under his arm without reading. He looked up at the sky. New York's bruise had turned the color of old cigarettes. He could taste the river. Dr. Cult, he said to the city, you come for my dead again, and I'll bury your idea beside them. The skull on his chest did not glow. It did not need to. The Black Terror walked into the night, and the night swallowed him like a promise it meant to keep, for now.